Hey there, Dan Kent here. As I start this journey looking at open theism and Calvinism and Arminianism and kind of some of these issues about God's knowledge and God's control and human potential and sin and all of this kind of stuff, it's going to get really complex and it's going to be all over the place. And so it's really helpful to have like a clothesline that you can kind of come back to and you can see where everything kind of pins on this clothesline, kind of like just a dumb, simple model to kind of serve as a foundation for everything that you work on. And so that's what I want to offer today. I want to offer just this really simple model that's going to be devoid of nuance. It's just going to be just dumb, simple, just so that we have a good general sense of what the foundation is of this entire journey. So that's what I want to do here today. To do this, I want to look at how the three main players, Calvinism, Arminianism, and open theism, relate to one another relative to God's providence and God's foreknowledge. That is, relative to what God controls and what God knows about the future. So, for instance, Calvinism has historically said that God, in a sense, sort of controls everything because God has this will, this comprehensive will for all of creation, down to the flapping of a butterfly wing, down to the spin of an electron. God has this thorough, comprehensive, meticulous script for every moment, and reality sort of unfolds according to that script. And because of that thorough, sort of meticulous control and the power of that will or that script, God also then knows in that same sort of meticulous, comprehensive way everything that has happened, everything that is happening, and everything that will happen in the future. In God's mind, there are no real uncertainties. There are no probabilities. There are no contingencies. Everything appears and exists in God's mind as the certainty that it is. Now, Arminians historically have often said that this view of God sort of bulldozes over personal responsibility. It bulldozes over personal freedom. How can a person be held responsible for their conduct if they are simply living out according to God's script? If they are simply doing what God wants them to do, why should they be held accountable? And so Arminians have often said that this view of God doesn't really work because in order for humans to be responsible, they need to have some sort of say-so. They need to have free will. And so Arminians say that God has given his creation a certain amount of genuine say-so so that they can freely make choices and grow and ultimately be responsible for themselves and to be held accountable for their behaviors and to engage in genuine, uncoerced love. Now, God doesn't give them like infinite say-so. God gives them a certain range of say-so. So there is this kind of boundary for which humans have to interact in, but it's enough for humans to be responsible and held accountable and for them to have genuine love. And really, open theism has always historically just kind of agreed with Arminianism pretty much verbatim on this point. But here's where things get interesting. Calvinists have often pushed back on Arminians, saying that, well, if God gives us any meaningful say-so, how can he be assured that his will be accomplished? And so Arminians have, in reply to this, said that, well, God still has comprehensive knowledge of what we are going to do in the future. That is, God knows what I'm going to freely choose to do. Just because he doesn't control what I do, he still knows what I'm going to freely do. And of course, the question there is, how could it be free if God knows what I'm going to do? Well, this is where Arminians will say things like, for instance, maybe God has a different relationship to time than we do. Maybe God is outside of time, seeing the past, present, and future all in one big, glorious, simultaneous now. So even though we freely make choices in the future, God is watching us make those free choices long before we actually make it. Now, there's a lot of reasons why Calvinists have historically had problems with this philosophically, and I will go into those eventually in the podcast, but for now, just know that Calvinists don't think that this works. And open theists tend to agree with Calvinists on this point. They think that it doesn't work either. And so even though Calvinists and open theists have sort of been at each other's throats over the last 20 years, the reason why open theism exists as it does is largely because they agree with Calvinism. And so what they say is that when God gives us genuine say-so, when God gives us genuine freedom, the nature of the future changes. The future now to God doesn't have only certainty. The future also has probability. The future has certain amounts of uncertainty. The future has both necessary things that for sure will happen, and also kind of possible things that may or may not happen. And God knows everything over whether it is possible or if it is necessary or actual. And so in that sense, if open theism is right, God's understanding of the future becomes a lot more complex. It becomes much more nuanced and much greater in scope. Now, this doesn't mean that anything goes. In the same way that God gives us a certain amount of say-so, there is also a corresponding amount of a certain amount of possibility. There's still so much actuality, and God still has enough control over things that he still knows that his will be accomplished. That is a very kind of brief, kind of simple sort of model for understanding how these three perspectives relate to one another. There's a lot more nuance there, but hopefully this helps you as we go forward in looking at these kind of profound ideas. Hey, I hope that was helpful. If you want to be a part of this journey, you can join us at surprisinggod.com. Also, check out the podcast. It's the Surprising God podcast, and you can send me questions, concerns, cries of heresy on Twitter at @ThatDanKent. And other than that, have a good day.